I realized I had ceased being Eleanor, the retired English teacher, the moment my daughter-in-law, Veronica, started introducing me as David's mom, our fantastic, unpaid event coordinator. If you're wondering why that particular line, delivered with a smile as sharp as crystal, felt like a punch to my gut, let me explain. That phrase wasn't a compliment. It was a humiliating, public reassignment of my worth. It reduced 68 years of independence, a successful career, and my entire identity to a job title: coordinator. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I live alone in this beautiful, historic Victorian home, a place I bought and restored with my own sweat and savings. My life has always been characterized by order, structure, and a quiet, contained elegance. But for the past 5 years, ever since Veronica married my son, David, I've slowly watched my role transition from beloved mother to unpaid staff, and my home turn into a high-end service annex for their social climbing. If you are still here, welcome to the Voice of Jenna, where you can hear stories of revenge, betrayal, and family drama. If you want to hear and feel those stories, then subscribe to the channel and enjoy. The rug cleaning incident that happened earlier that afternoon was just the latest violation, a perfect microcosm of Veronica's entitlement. I'd opened the elegant, leather-bound folder, expecting my bank statement, but instead found a detailed, itemized receipt for a professional rug cleaning, a $3,000 expense billed directly to my private online account, signed, of course, by Veronica Stone. She didn't even bother to notify me. I picked up the phone, my fingers tight around the cool plastic, and called David. You see, David is my only child, and I adore him. He's kind, he's intelligent, but he is the spine of a limp noodle when it comes to Veronica. His role in this domestic drama is to be the mediator who mediates nothing, the passive shield who allows his wife's demands to pass through him and land directly on me. Honey, Veronica just billed a $3,000 rug cleaning to my account without asking. Why? I asked, trying to keep the tremor of outrage out of my voice. David sighed, the sound of a man already weary of conflict.
Oh, Mom. She just mentioned that.
She said you wouldn't mind. The cleaner needed the account number right away, and yours was linked to the old delivery schedule. It was an accident. She's going to transfer the funds to you immediately. An accident. Of course, it was an accident. Every exploitation, every demand, every invasion of my privacy is always couched in the language of a trivial, excusable mistake. The truth is, Veronica views my time, my space, and my money as communal assets dedicated to the maintenance of her image. I hung up, knowing the transfer wouldn't happen unless I sent a detailed invoice, and even then, it would be accompanied by a resentful email detailing how stressed Veronica is. This incident, however small, was the final, stinging pinch that made me realize I was at a breaking point. The theme of my life since David married Veronica has become the erosion of self-worth. I am a highly capable, intelligent woman, but in their narrative, I am simply Mom, the retired teacher who has nothing better to do than polish silver, host extravagant holidays, and manage their overflow. I walked through the silent rooms of my house, the late afternoon sun casting long, golden streaks across the newly polished hardwood floors. The house smelled faintly of expensive lavender and the distant promise of winter. I was organizing the china cabinet, a task I love, but one that Veronica frequently disrupts, moving my delicate inherited pieces to make room for her bulky, modern serving platters. I started listing the deeper invasions in my head, the rising action of my slow-burn resentment. She assigned me specific recipes to cook for Thanksgiving while she supervised. She frequently insists I drive 40 miles to pick up and drop off her dry cleaning. She keeps her expensive, off-season ski gear stored in my pristine basement, taking up the space where I wanted to set up my pottery studio. It's about being made to feel useful only in the context of their convenience. I reached for an old, familiar box of Christmas decorations, the ones I cherished, the simple, delicate ornaments David and I made years ago. I stopped. The box felt heavy, not just with ornaments, but with the weight of expectation. I realized that this year, the Christmas preparations wouldn't even start with me. They would start with a command from Veronica. I sat down on the edge of the large, sturdy sofa, the one Veronica insists is perfect for holding large crowds, and stared at the fireplace, cold now, but soon to be the centerpiece of her expected holiday chaos. I knew that the most significant invasion was coming. The Christmas conversation. The call where she would outline the exact demands she had for me this year. I had always dreaded it, but this year, a new, tiny spark of resistance flickered to life. I was tired of being introduced as the unpaid event coordinator. I picked up the leather folder again, tracing the signature on the rug receipt. Veronica Stone. She viewed me as a commodity. But if you're asking me, the retired teacher who knows how to plan, how to budget, and how to execute a strategy, I was about to teach Veronica a very serious lesson about the true cost of disrespect. The rug cleaning incident had been the final straw. The phone rang, startling me. It was David. Mom, Veronica is calling. She's got the plans for Christmas. Can you listen, please? She's really excited. The climax of the exposition was here. I took a deep breath, the scent of expensive rug chemicals suddenly stinging my nose. I picked up the phone, a strange, quiet calm settling over me. I was ready for the announcement, but Veronica was not ready for my answer. I barely said hello before Veronica launched in. Perfect. So, Eleanor, the entire Stone clan, 27 confirmed, plus 3 kids, will be spending Christmas Eve through Boxing Day at your place this year. You know that feeling? That slow-motion shock, where the words hit your ears, but your brain struggles to process the sheer scale of the audacity? That's exactly what I felt as I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, in the quiet, sun-drenched laundry room of my home. 27 people, plus 3 children, for 3 full days. I looked around at the meticulously folded pile of my own linen, a small, comforting vision of order, and realized Veronica was planning to turn my life into a human assembly line for 72 hours straight. 27, Veronica? That sounds like a small army. I managed, trying to keep my voice light, though my hands had frozen mid-fold on a pristine white tablecloth. Veronica laughed, a high, grating sound that always makes me feel like I've failed some unstated social test. It's 30, Eleanor, if you count us and David. Don't be dramatic. It's just my immediate family.
We just need the space.
You know our apartment is far too small, and really, your Victorian is just ideal for entertaining on this scale. It's a literal godsend. A literal godsend. That's what my home, my sanctuary, my retirement security, had become, a free holiday resort for the Stone clan. The rising action in my resentment thermometer just spiked past boiling. I looked out the window at my sprawling backyard. This house, with its 12-foot ceilings and expansive common areas, was a reflection of my late husband's and my hard work. We built it to be a home, but Veronica only saw square footage and potential capacity. She continued outlining the plan, completely oblivious to the deafening silence on my end. We've decided on a rotating seating chart for dinner, so we'll need the dining room and the library repurposed for overflow. And we'll need to clear out the sunroom for the children's activities. Oh, and you'll need to start preparing the linen inventory next week. We figured 4 sets of towels per guest, and, since the air mattresses are going in the ballroom, at least 8 sets of fresh bedding. David interjected faintly in the background, a soft, nervous flutter of support. It's going to be great, Mom. Veronica's mom is so excited to finally see the house. See the house. Not see me. The theme of my invisibility and diminished worth couldn't have been clearer. I wasn't the hostess. I was the innkeeper. I was the chief launderer, the head chef, and the concierge for Veronica's elaborate performance of familial bliss. My internal thoughts were racing. I wasn't thinking about the towels. I was thinking about the time. The preparation for an event of this scale would consume my entire December, erasing my quiet routines, my book club, my weekly volunteer shift at the library, the very things that constitute my self-worth now that I'm retired. You're right, Veronica. That's quite a logistical undertaking, I finally said, adopting my old teacher voice, calm, measured, and subtly challenging. Have you accounted for the fact that my oven can only manage 3 turkeys simultaneously, or that the septic system is rated for 7 overnight guests, not 30? The question caught her slightly off guard, forcing a momentary pause in her torrent of demands. That was the subtle tension I needed. Oh, David is handling the catering overflow, and we'll just manage the showers sequentially, she dismissed, quickly recovering with a flick of arrogance. It's all doable. You just need to focus on the basics: the house preparation, the holiday ambience, and securing all the necessary baking supplies. You're such a master baker, Eleanor. Everyone loves your shortbread. The shortbread. The one thing she allows me to be good at. The sheer manipulation was exhausting. I suddenly realized that the reason she never asks me what I plan to do for Christmas is because she views my time as a fixed, disposable asset. My retirement is her utility. This thought brought a sharp, cold clarity. A little over a year ago, I had helped David and Veronica refinance their home loan. In the process, I was given access to their financial statements, with their permission, of course. I remembered seeing some highly unusual, large cash withdrawals tied to business travel that seemed disproportionate to David's actual income. At the time, I dismissed it, trusting David. But the incident with the rug cleaning, the financial audacity of it, suddenly connected those dots. Foreshadowing future plot twists. Could Veronica be using my expected service as camouflage for something financially deeper? Could those huge expenditures be related to how stressed she always claims to be? I walked over to the antique roll-top desk in the corner, gently opening the drawer that held my travel brochures. I hadn't booked anything, but the glossy pages showing the turquoise waters of the Caribbean suddenly felt like a viable escape route, not just a fantasy. Well, Veronica, I said, letting a sliver of hesitation enter my voice, the perfect decoy for my secret plan. That is certainly a lot to coordinate. I'll need to check my calendar and see how feasible all of that is for the entire 3 days. I'll call you back this evening with a full answer. Of course, Eleanor. Just confirm the numbers so I can send out the final email. It's really the least you can do, isn't it? She finished, her voice saccharine with expectation. I hung up the phone, the silence of the large house immediately descending, but it wasn't peaceful. It felt charged, like the moment before a major storm. My meticulous character traits were now focused entirely on strategic defense. I wasn't going to spend my retirement planning another woman's extravagant holiday. The time for silent service was over. Veronica had given me the date and the numbers for her invasion. Now I needed to solidify the details of my escape and, more importantly, the reason why her financial demands were so urgent. The tension was building, and for the first time in years, I was excited to see the collapse. The plan is simple, Veronica. You host your beautiful Christmas party right here, as planned. But you'll need to do it without me. I delivered that line with the steady, calm tone I used when correcting a student's egregious spelling error, maintaining absolute control over my voice while my heart hammered a furious rhythm against my ribs. I had called David and Veronica back, just as promised, but the purpose of the call was not to confirm the linen count. It was to announce my declaration of independence. There was a silence on the other end of the line, a thick, stunned silence that felt more satisfying than any victory I'd ever won in a classroom debate. Then, Veronica's gasp, sharp and involuntary, ripped through the quiet. Without you? Eleanor, what on earth are you talking about? It's your house. And it's Christmas. You can't possibly mean you're going somewhere else. The setting for this confrontation was my den, a small, cozy room where I usually felt safe. Tonight, however, the dimly lit room, with its walls lined with academic texts, felt like a command center. I was sitting at my desk, the glossy brochure for the Caribbean tucked beneath my elbow, a visual anchor for my resolve. I'm traveling, Veronica, I clarified, allowing a hint of light, genuine excitement to color my tone. I've decided to take that cruise I've put off for years. It departs on December 23rd and returns on the 29th. Unfortunately, that means I won't be able to coordinate the 3-day gathering. The main conflict, which had been simmering beneath the surface of my polite compliance for 5 years, had finally erupted. The issue wasn't the trip itself. It was the abrupt removal of the foundation, My labor, my organization, my home, upon which Veronica's elaborate holiday plans rested. The rising tension was immediate. David, who had clearly been listening passively, finally spoke up, his voice weak and confused. Mom, wait, we already sent the invitations. You knew we were relying on you. What about the food? What about all the bedrooms? David, darling, I confirmed that I needed to check my calendar before giving a final answer, remember? And I encourage you and Veronica to hire a professional caterer and event staff. My role as hostess ended when I retired from teaching. I simply hadn't enforced the rule until now, I explained, channeling the unwavering authority of a department head facing down a difficult parent. Veronica, recovering quickly from shock, switched instantly to aggressive manipulation. Her voice dropped, adopting a sickly sweet tone laced with malice. Eleanor, be reasonable. This is your only son's wife's family. They are important clients for David's firm. This isn't just about having fun. It's about networking and securing major accounts. You know how important this is to David's career, and you're suddenly going to abandon him 2 weeks before Christmas for a little cruise. That was her go-to strategy, emotional blackmail filtered through David's career. The theme of self-worth versus imposed obligation was screaming in my head. I had sacrificed my career pinnacle for David 20 years ago. She expected me to continue sacrificing my retirement for his financial benefit, all while treating me like hired help. I will not sacrifice myself again, my inner voice asserted, firm and unwavering. Veronica, David's career is between the two of you. My vacation plans are mine alone, I stated simply. The good news is that the house is available for your use. Since you find it so ideal for entertaining, you and David are welcome to stay here and host your 27 guests, provided you handle all the logistics. The cleaning, the food, the sewage capacity, and the linen service. I just need the keys back before the 23rd, as my car service will be arriving promptly at 10 a.m. The implication was devastating. I was giving them the burden without the benefit of my labor. My retirement house was indeed ideal, but only because I was the tireless, invisible machine running its operations. Without me, it was just a very large, complicated house that required a significant amount of work. Veronica's voice rose sharply, losing all pretense of civility. You are being completely ridiculous, Eleanor. You are always here. What on earth is so important about a cruise right now? You're making this about me, aren't you? You're just trying to sabotage my holiday. I am making this about me, Veronica. For the first time in a long time, I corrected her gently. And my calendar is no longer dictated by your convenience. If you feel my decision is sabotage, perhaps you should reflect on why your plans are so reliant on my unpaid, unappreciated labor. I knew I was pushing the plot escalation dangerously fast, but I couldn't stop. Years of suppressed resentment were fueling my dialogue. David finally chimed in again, his tone accusatory. Mom, that's harsh. Veronica spends hours planning this. Why are you suddenly being so difficult? It's not fair to the family. It is unfair to the family that your wife expects me to serve 30 people for 3 days straight, David. It is unfair that she treats my home like a free hotel and my account like an auxiliary fund for her expensive Persian rugs, I countered, bringing the rug incident back into the main conflict. The $3,000 expense she billed to my account without permission is just a small example of how she views me. Veronica immediately tried to regain control, switching from outrage to pity. That was an accident, Eleanor.
We already talked about that.
Why are you dredging up old drama when I'm trying to plan a beautiful Christmas for everyone? I am dredging it up because it clarifies the theme of our relationship, Veronica. You demand, I provide, and then you minimize the cost. That pattern ends now. The house is available. The cruise is booked. You have 2 weeks to organize your small army. Good luck with the septic system. I ended the call, disconnecting from the ensuing emotional and logistical chaos I had just unleashed. I sat back in the silence of the den, the smooth, cool wood of the desk comforting beneath my fingertips. The confrontation was messy, the dialogue intense, but the emotional feeling that flooded me was pure, exhilarating release. I had stood up for myself. I had taken control of my life. I looked at the Caribbean brochure, the image of a hammock strung between two palm trees beckoning. The initial clash had occurred. Veronica's power lay entirely in my obedience, and I had just publicly withdrawn my consent. But I knew this was only the start of the rising action. Veronica Stone does not accept defeat easily. Her next move would be far more cunning, far more manipulative, and it would likely involve exploiting David's passivity to escalate the conflict. The seeds of the climax were sown. My simple cruise was now a direct threat to her social standing, and she would fight back to prove I couldn't abandon my post. My freedom was declared, but the battle to secure it was just beginning. The doorbell didn't ring. It shuddered. An hour after I hung up, Veronica stood on my front porch, dressed in an unnervingly formal winter coat, with David hovering beside her like a sad, passive accessory. I knew she wouldn't wait. Veronica views any boundary I try to set as a personal offense, a challenge that must be crushed immediately. I opened the door, and the crisp November air rushed past her expensive fur collar, carrying the sharp, sweet scent of her designer perfume and the unmistakable stench of desperation. "Eleanor, we need to talk. Now," she demanded, brushing past me into the entrance hall without invitation. The sudden intrusion amplified the tension. My home, my newly reclaimed sanctuary, felt immediately violated. David followed, looking miserable. His eyes pleaded with me, a silent, pathetic appeal that was, honestly, my greatest obstacle. The sight of my son looking defeated and stressed, even if it was because of his own wife's arrogance, still triggered decades of ingrained maternal rescue instincts. Veronica immediately launched into the highly personal escalation. She didn't bother with the linens or the catering. She went straight for the jugular. David's career. David's end-of-year promotion depends on this gathering. His biggest client, Mr. Sinclair, flies in from London specifically for this holiday networking opportunity. If we cancel, if we look disorganized, David loses everything, the promotion, the bonus, everything we've worked for. She didn't look at David. She only addressed me, framing the conflict as a catastrophic maternal failure. I stood tall, folding my arms against the chill that had entered the house. "Veronica, if David's promotion hinges on whether his 68-year-old mother is available to manage 30 overnight guests, then David's career is built on a very shaky foundation." David finally spoke, his voice tight with real stress.
Mom, she's not wrong.
Veronica's family is leverage. Mr. Sinclair expects to see a large, happy, well-supported family unit. He expects the traditional Christmas. You leaving makes us look unstable. It makes me look incapable of managing my home life. Please, Mom, just push the trip back. Just this 1 year. His plea was the most difficult thing I faced. His fear was genuine, which meant his belief in Veronica's narrative, that I was ruining him, was genuine. This emotional pressure was the struggle I had to overcome. Theme reinforcement. The choice wasn't just between the cruise and the chaos. It was between my independence and perpetuating David's reliance on my martyrdom. If I caved now, I would confirm that Veronica's guilt trips were the ultimate control switch. I looked at David, feeling a profound, painful sorrow. "David, I love you. But I refuse to be held emotionally hostage to your wife's networking strategy. If your job depends on my servitude, then perhaps it's time to reevaluate the job." Veronica shifted tactics, her eyes darting around the pristine living room. "This isn't just about the job, Eleanor. It's about us. Don't you want to be here with your son for Christmas? Are you honestly choosing a buffet in the Caribbean over your only child?" Her manipulative dialogue was highly effective, aiming for the core loneliness of a widow. But her actions betrayed a deeper tension. As she spoke, her hand instinctively went to her coat pocket, where a small, stiff piece of paper was visible. It looked like a receipt or a bill. She quickly pushed it deeper into the lining, a flicker of panic in her eyes. Plot complication and foreshadowing. Why the frantic secrecy? Why the over-the-top panic about David's career, which I knew was generally stable? This confirmed my suspicion that the urgency was not about David's promotion, but about a much more urgent, personal financial pressure she was facing. Veronica, I said, stepping closer, my voice dropping to a level that forced her to listen. I've spent the last 25 Christmases coordinating this house. I deserve a break. And if you're under the kind of financial pressure where $3,000 rug cleanings are being fraudulently charged to my account, then perhaps you need to address the actual structural problems in your budget, not the lack of linen service at my house. The mention of the rug cleaning startled her. She realized I was no longer the meek mother, but an active opponent who was paying attention. That was settled, she snapped, the false sweetness completely gone. No, Veronica. It was deferred. And now, with this emergency visit, you've made the conflict urgent. You have 9 days to find a caterer, rent 100 towels, and secure a professional to deal with the inevitable septic issues. I am taking the cruise. The challenge was laid bare. Veronica stared at me, her expression a mix of fury and disbelief. She realized she couldn't win this negotiation using guilt alone. She grabbed David's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. Let's go, David. Your mother is clearly making her choice. She's choosing her pleasure over her own son's financial stability.
Fine.
We'll manage. But don't expect any sympathy when you realize the consequences of this selfishness, Eleanor. She turned and marched out, leaving David standing alone for a brief, heartbreaking moment. He looked back at me, his eyes full of hurt and passive blame. I just wish you could be here, Mom. It feels like you're abandoning me, he whispered. That was the absolute peak of my emotional struggle. Seeing David's pain, even pain manufactured by his wife, was debilitating. But I held firm. I forced myself to remember the rug receipt, the casual theft, and the insult of the unpaid coordinator. I'm not abandoning you, David. I replied, the truth simple and definitive. I'm forcing you to stand up. And I'm finally taking care of myself.
He didn't respond.
He simply turned and followed his wife out into the cold, leaving me alone in the sudden, echoing silence. I leaned against the door, feeling physically exhausted but mentally clear. The emotional stakes were now astronomical. Veronica had failed to make me change my mind, but she had successfully reinforced the suspicion that something much larger, something financial and secret, was forcing her hand. I had 9 days until the cruise, and I needed to find out exactly what she was hiding in that coat pocket. A $3,000 rug cleaning, Eleanor? That sounds like the maintenance budget for a small yacht. That was Carol, my dear friend and former colleague, summarizing the rug incident over our weekly Tuesday coffee. Carol, a retired history teacher, possesses a magnificent radar for manipulation and a beautiful skepticism for appearances, a quality I desperately needed right now. I sat in the familiar, quiet corner of our local bookstore cafe, surrounded by the comforting smell of old paper and fresh coffee. This was my attempt at normalcy, trying to maintain the outward semblance of Eleanor Hayes while internally preparing for a domestic war. It's not the amount, Carol, it's the audacity. And the urgency of their visit afterwards, I explained, lowering my voice. Veronica was frantic, not just about losing my labor, but about David losing his client, Mr. Sinclair. But I know David's firm is stable. The panic felt manufactured. And I saw her quickly hide a bill in her coat pocket. This brought us to the subplot that would deepen the tension. I needed to know what financial disaster was truly driving Veronica's need for this extravagant, image-conscious Christmas. Veronica doesn't do anything without an angle, Eleanor. If she's panicking, she's either deeply in debt or she's hiding assets, Carol mused, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. And if she's using David's client, Mr. Sinclair, as the ultimate threat, then Sinclair is the key. The focus shifted. Mr. Sinclair, the London client, wasn't just a guest. He was the ultimate objective of the Christmas party and the ultimate threat used to manipulate me. The stakes weren't just about my freedom. They were about exposing a potential professional lie that could ruin David's career, regardless of my presence. I only have 9 days until the cruise, I told Carol. I need to know if David and Veronica are facing a professional audit, a personal debt, or if Veronica is involved in something that puts David's stable income at risk. If she's facing a massive personal debt, She would be motivated to impress Sinclair and secure a huge bonus for David, or perhaps even ask Sinclair for a personal investment. Carol's eyes widened with conspiratorial delight. I know a woman. My niece, Julie. She works in corporate financial forensics. She does background checks for high-net-worth individuals. She's fiercely discreet, and she owes me a massive favor from tutoring her through her final exams. The introduction of Julie, the supporting character with a crucial skill set, immediately raised the plot stakes. We were moving from domestic defense to corporate espionage. The theme was clarified. Self-reclamation requires strategic investigation. Later that evening, after a tense, brief conversation with David that consisted mostly of him expressing his disappointment in my choices, Julie called me. Her voice was sharp, professional, and entirely detached from the emotional drama. A private inquiry into Veronica Stone and her current financial status, based on public records and any recent filing anomalies, Julie summarized my request. And a cross-reference with this client, Mr. Sinclair, to see if he has any documented history of funding personal side ventures for the families of his associates. Exactly, I confirmed, sitting in my now quiet den, the warmth of the fireplace fighting the cold anxiety in my stomach. I'm looking for a pattern of financial distress, especially anything related to large, recurring personal loans or short-term lending. The plot complication arrived 2 days later, not as a finding, but as an action. Julie called back, her tone urgent. Eleanor, I found something. Not on Veronica's side, but on David's. I noticed a massive uptick in his monthly life insurance premium. It's a specialized policy with an escalating premium structure, and he's paying nearly 5 times the average premium for someone his age and income. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. A specialized policy? What kind? The kind that names a single beneficiary and pays out a massive lump sum upon his death. It's highly unusual unless he has extreme, high-risk debt or, sometimes, if the beneficiary is trying to secure future leverage. I gripped the phone tightly, the simple act of breathing suddenly difficult. The rising suspense was almost unbearable. My inner thought screamed, Veronica isn't just exploiting David's career, she's ensuring she profits from his failure. She's insuring him like a prized racehorse. The emotional resonance was profound and terrifying. This wasn't about shortbread and towels anymore. This was about my son's life being collateralized. Veronica's frantic urgency to secure David's promotion and his continued income was merely to ensure the premium on this enormous life insurance policy was paid. Who is the beneficiary, Julie? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The sole beneficiary is a newly formed, private LLC registered under an offshore name. But the registration address is the same as Veronica's personal P.O. box. She is the ultimate, protected owner, Eleanor. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was the ultimate betrayal. The conflict had escalated beyond mere selfishness to something cold, calculated, and terrifying. Veronica wasn't just planning a lavish Christmas. She was safeguarding her financial future with my son's life insurance. The stakes were now life and death. The subplot had just delivered the crucial plot twist. My plan to simply take a cruise and reclaim my dignity was no longer enough. I needed to act decisively to expose this before David signed any further documents under her manipulative spell. The final confrontation was going to be much bigger than a ruined Christmas. It was going to be a battle to save my son from the financial trap his wife had sprung. I called David and asked for a simple PDF of his will, thinking I needed to check his assets. His answer wasn't a refusal. It was a cold, unfamiliar line. Mom, Veronica said I should talk to her about all financial matters first. That was the serious setback. Not the theft, not the screaming, but the realization that Veronica had successfully driven a wedge so deep into my relationship with my son that I could no longer access him, even with a question couched in love and concern. My voice had become muffled by her strategic gatekeeping. The call came the morning after Julie gave me the horrifying news about the specialized life insurance policy. I had planned a subtle fishing expedition, a gentle request for David's current legal documents to update my own estate plan, a way to confirm his will hadn't been recently altered in Veronica's favor. But Veronica, cunning and always anticipating my moves, had already coached him. His voice on the phone sounded strained, mechanical, utterly devoid of his usual warmth. "Mom, I'm sorry. Veronica says you have a tendency to worry unnecessarily. She wants all the documents centralized. If you have questions, just ask her." The emotional impact was immediate and devastating. It was a complete failure of maternal communication. I wasn't just losing access to his finances. I was losing my son to his wife's psychological manipulation. Inner dialogue reflecting turmoil. I used to hold him when he was scared. I used to comfort him when he was sad. Now, I can't even ask him about his own life. This isn't passive enabling anymore. This is a willing surrender. He's choosing her control over my care. I tried one last appeal, injecting genuine, urgent fear into my tone. "David, this is important. I'm just trying to make sure you're protected. There are some things I've noticed about Veronica's finances that concern me, especially when it comes to long-term liabilities." He cut me off, and for the first time, his tone held a defensive edge, likely fueled by his wife's fear.
Mom.
"Stop. You're getting stressed out over nothing. Veronica manages everything perfectly. You need to focus on your cruise and stop creating drama. I trust my wife." He hung up, leaving me standing in the center of my large, quiet kitchen, the sunlight streaming in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, the beautiful, peaceful setting suddenly transforming into a sterile quarantine zone. My challenge was clear. I had to save David from a professional manipulator, but my son himself was now the obstacle. I called Julie back, my hands trembling. She listened to the short, painful exchange with the detached professionalism of someone observing a complex, predictable pattern of abuse. "That confirms it, Eleanor," Julie stated, her voice sharp. "Veronica is isolating him. She knows you are her biggest threat because you have independent access to capital and legal minds. David is now her human shield. Any further direct attempt to acquire information or warn him will only push him further into her control, and she will paint you as the aggressive, jealous mother trying to sabotage his marriage." The gravity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. The theme of my personal journey had shifted dramatically. It was no longer about reclaiming my self-worth. It was about accepting that self-worth demanded war. I was facing an antagonist whose cunning extended far beyond seating charts. She was playing a dangerous, high-stakes game with life insurance and debt. "What do I do, Julie? The Christmas deadline is closing in. If I leave for the cruise, I lose my physical proximity. If I stay, I risk a direct, ugly confrontation before I have the legal leverage." Julie offered the only logical path forward, introducing the crucial missing piece: professional intervention. "You need a lawyer, Eleanor. A good one. One who specializes in high-net-worth estate litigation and financial fraud. We can't rely on emotional pleading anymore. We need to subpoena the documentation for that life insurance policy and the LLC. That requires court orders, not coffee talks." That evening, I met with Carol. I laid out the whole terrifying truth: the specialized policy, the offshore LLC, Veronica as the sole beneficiary, and David's refusal to speak to me. Carol, my anchor, looked at me with deep, protective compassion. "She's isolating him financially and emotionally. She's creating a dependency that will be extremely difficult to break," Carol said softly, grasping my hand across the table. "You have to let go of trying to be the mother he wants and become the force he needs. You need to stop asking politely and start demanding the truth, with the full backing of the law." I looked at Carol, seeing the reflection of my own growing strength. The rising action demanded an immediate, decisive move. I knew the shame of involving lawyers would be immense. It would confirm the hostility of the relationship publicly and might permanently sever the bond with David. But the alternative, silence, and the terrifying possibility that Veronica was planning to cash in on my son's life, was unthinkable. The greatest failure would be inaction. That night, sitting alone in my quiet, beautiful home, I pulled out my laptop. The emotional turmoil had finally crystallized into cold, unyielding resolve. I wasn't going on a cruise, but I wasn't hosting Christmas either. I was preparing a siege. I needed a shark, a specialist who could navigate the murky waters of offshore finances and predatory spouses. I needed to ensure that when Veronica's family arrived, the stage would be set not for a grand Christmas feast, but for the most dramatic legal intervention of her life. My choice was made. The theme of self-preservation now necessitated total war. I started searching for the most formidable estate lawyer in the state. The lawyer's name was Clara Vance, a coincidence that made me smile, a legal namesake for the new Eleanor Hayes. She was a sleek, uncompromising woman who specialized in complex, high-stakes financial cases, and she had listened to my story of the rug cleaning, the Christmas invasion, and the horrifying life insurance policy with the quiet intensity of a surgeon planning an incision. Sitting in her minimalist, high-rise office, a setting that stood in stark contrast to the old-world comfort of my Victorian home, I felt an unprecedented sense of clarity. The turmoil that had engulfed me after David's defensive rejection in the last chapter had settled into cold, pragmatic resolve. "Eleanor, you need to understand the pattern here," Clara explained, her voice low and authoritative. "Veronica is leveraging your maternal obligation against your assets. She knows you won't ruin David, so she uses him as a shield. The life insurance policy isn't about protecting him, it's about securing her future in the event of his failure or death. It's financial predation, pure and simple." I nodded, watching the city skyline from her massive window. The sensory details, the distant sirens, the hum of air conditioning, the sterile scent of polished glass, all served to reinforce the gravity of the legal world I had entered. This was far removed from the cozy, emotional sphere of motherhood. Clara's insight sparked a deep internal reflection, connecting my current pain to a pattern of self-sacrifice that defined my life. Flashback. I remembered the year David was 9, and my late husband, Arthur, was fighting a protracted legal battle that threatened our financial stability. I had worked 3 jobs that year, teaching during the day, tutoring in the evenings, and selling handmade crafts on weekends. I never complained. Arthur would look at me and say, "Eleanor, you're the foundation of this family. We'd collapse without you." That statement, meant as a compliment, became my blueprint for life. If I stopped supporting, everything would fall apart. That memory, usually a source of pride, now tasted like poison. I realized my vulnerability wasn't my wealth. It was my ingrained need to be the indispensable foundation. Veronica hadn't invented this dynamic. She had simply exploited the structure I had willingly built. Character arc development. The theme of my story, reclaiming self-worth, was now less about demanding respect from Veronica and more about dismantling the myth of my indispensability. I had to let David fall, just slightly, to force him to stand. "Clara, I need 2 things," I said, finally articulating my plan. "First, I need the legal teeth to protect David. Can we, through an emergency court order, force a full review of that life insurance policy and the LLC, based on the evidence of financial fraud, starting with the unauthorized use of my credit account?" Clara smiled faintly, a predatory glint in her eyes. "We can. The unauthorized charge gives us a strong point of entry for forensic accounting, especially when coupled with the size of the life insurance premium. We'll file a civil suit immediately to freeze any assets tied to that LLC, demanding disclosure." "And the second thing?" I asked, leaning forward. "The second thing," I continued, my voice steady with a newfound, exhilarating conviction, "is the announcement. I don't want a quiet legal intervention. I want this to happen precisely when it causes Veronica the maximum amount of disruption, exposure, and humiliation." She scheduled the grand performance of her perfect family for Christmas Eve, using my home as her backdrop. I need to be present when the curtain falls. Clara didn't flinch. She simply nodded, understanding the dramatic, public nature of the confrontation. "You want to shift the setting from a family holiday to a legal theater. The day before Christmas Eve is too early. She could mitigate the damage. Christmas Day is too late." The best moment for an emotional and financial shockwave is Christmas Eve, just as the family arrives and before the first toast. We mapped out the plan. I wouldn't be going on the cruise. I would be staying home, meticulously preparing my house, not for guests, but for battle. The house would be immaculate, a perfect, gleaming shell of hospitality, designed to make Veronica believe I had caved under the pressure and decided to host after all. The psychological warfare was necessary to ensure she didn't cancel the entire gathering out of spite. I left Clara's office feeling like a soldier who had just received her orders. The next few days were a blur of intense preparation. I called Carol, my confidant, and updated her on the life insurance horror and the new legal strategy. "So you're not going to Barbados?" Carol observed wryly. "No, Carol. I'm hosting the most expensive, dramatic, and ultimately satisfying performance of my life," I replied. "I've arranged for a spectacular catered meal and a full-service staff. Veronica will arrive expecting to supervise me, only to find the house immaculate, the kitchen humming, and me entirely unavailable. My house will provide the labor, but not me." This was the final step in my character evolution. I wasn't just saying no. I was turning my denial into a strategic trap. The theme was fully realized. My dignity is not negotiable, and my freedom requires professional execution. I walked through my house that evening, the scent of lavender replaced by the faint, clinical smell of my cleaning crew. Everything was pristine, ready for the 30 guests who would arrive expecting a cozy family gathering. I sat down at my desk and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. I started writing a meticulous list of points I needed to make to David. Not accusations, but facts, laid out with the cold logic of an English teacher grading an essay. Fact A, the unauthorized charge. Fact B, the secret LLC. Fact C, the life insurance premium. The final confrontation was now only days away. Veronica had counted on my silence, my kindness, and my guilt. But she had forgotten that beneath the warm facade of the retired teacher was a brilliant planner who knew how to structure a winning argument and execute a perfect demolition. The stage was set, the evidence was gathered, and the attorney was ready. Veronica Stone was about to learn that you never insult the architect of the house you plan to burn down. The scent of pine and fresh citrus was deceptive. My house, usually a haven of cozy, lived-in comfort, now felt like a beautifully staged trap. Every surface gleamed, every silver piece shone, and the scent was a deliberate illusion of a classic, effortless Christmas. 2 days before Christmas Eve, D-Day, I finalized the logistics. My internal resolve, once fragile, was now hard and sharp, tempered by the horrifying knowledge of the life insurance policy. This wasn't just about reclaiming my self-worth. It was about saving David from a life sentence of financial servitude, or worse. The theme was clear. Strategic preparation is the highest form of self-defense. I called David. The dialogue was brief and strained, designed to lull Veronica into a false sense of victory. "Mom, is everything okay? Veronica said you hired a cleaning crew this week." His voice was laced with suspicion, anticipating a last-minute surrender. "Everything is fine, dear," I replied, allowing a small, theatrical sigh into my tone. I realized that I simply can't abandon you completely. I felt too guilty. So I decided to simplify things. I've hired a full-service catering and events team. They are managing everything, the food, the linens, the cleanup, and yes, the staff to deal with the 3 days of guests. They even brought their own portable toilet system to avoid stressing the septic tank. I heard a muffled exclamation in the background. Veronica, no doubt, realizing I had spent a considerable sum to replace my labor with paid professionals, thus denying her the opportunity to supervise and critique my efforts. You hired a staff? For 30 people? David sounded utterly bewildered, the plot advancing rapidly beyond his comprehension. "Of course, dear. I won't be here, but the house is available to you, as I promised." The staff arrives at noon on Christmas Eve, and they report directly to the events manager. They have explicit instructions not to bother Veronica or me with any logistics. You and your guests will be impeccably taken care of. This was the core of my strategy. The house as a decoy. By providing the house and the professional labor, I eliminated Veronica's primary complaints, the difficulty of hosting, while simultaneously setting the stage for the true confrontation. She would assume my guilt trip had led to a lavish, expensive concession, confirming her power over me. Later that afternoon, I sat with Carol in the sunroom, reviewing the final details. The room, which Veronica wanted cleared for children's activities, was filled with the beautiful, fragrant chaos of the caterer's initial setup, a stark reminder that this space was now under my control. The catering staff will serve as my eyes and ears until Clara arrives, I explained to Carol, tapping a precise set of notes. Their presence guarantees Veronica cannot claim I canceled the holiday, only that I am absent from it. And the crucial moment is 7 p.m. on Christmas Eve. That's when the majority of the Stone family arrives for the grand cocktail hour. Carol, dressed in her usual practical tweed, nodded, her eyes twinkling with approval. So, you're not making a grand entrance, Eleanor. You're making an administrative decision. Precisely, I confirmed, a deep sense of righteous determination settling in my chest. At 7:05 p.m., I will walk into my own living room, where Veronica will be performing her duties as the perfect hostess, and I will introduce Clara Vance, the lawyer who is about to file an injunction against Veronica's LLC and freeze her entire financial structure. The plot advancement was concrete. The climax was scheduled for Christmas Eve. My character growth was tied entirely to this action. I had stopped reacting to Veronica's demands, cleaning the rug, hosting the party, and started dictating the terms of engagement. I was no longer the soft, emotional mother. I was the strategist, leveraging my resources and intellectual capacity. The decision felt empowering, even exhilarating. I had one more conversation to have, the toughest dialogue of all. I drove across town to the quiet, suburban home of an old family friend, George Thompson, who was David's father's best friend and, crucially, David's godfather. George was a man of integrity and calm judgment. He and his wife, Martha, were sitting by their fireplace, the picture of quiet domesticity. "George, I need your help." I started, laying out the situation with cold, clinical facts: the rug, the forced servitude, the life insurance policy, and the isolation. I presented the evidence, not the emotion. George listened, his face hardening as I spoke, the familiar warmth draining away. When I finished, the silence was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire. "Eleanor, this is horrifying. I know Veronica has always been demanding, but financial manipulation of this scale, and the life insurance policy," he shook his head in disbelief. "I need you to be there on Christmas Eve, George. I need a neutral, respected family member to witness the confrontation. Not for my defense, but for David's sake. When Veronica launches her inevitable, hysterical counter-narrative that I am the jealous, selfish mother ruining David, I need a voice of reason who can pull David aside and force him to look at the legal documents without her influence." George stood up, walking to the window, his large, capable hands clasped behind his back. The internal dialogue I imagined he was having, the conflict between protecting David's marriage and protecting David's life, was intense. Finally, he turned back, his gaze firm. "Arthur would have wanted David protected, Eleanor. I will be there. I'll tell David we had a prior engagement with the catering staff, an oversight I need to apologize for. I will be your witness, and I will be David's anchor." His dialogue revealing determination was a tremendous relief. The supporting characters, Carol the strategist, Clara the lawyer, and now George the anchor, were all in place. The final plot piece was set. I drove home that night, the city lights blurring outside my windshield. I was not afraid. My entire house was a magnificent stage, ready for the final act. I had turned my humiliation into a calculated weapon. Veronica Stone was walking into the most lavish and most legally compromised holiday party of her life. And I, Eleanor Hayes, the quiet, retired English teacher, was about to teach her the meaning of a perfectly structured conclusion. The climax was moments away. The house roared with the sound of 32 strangers' laughter, Yet the single most shocking noise was the sound of my own footsteps, slow and deliberate, on the main marble floor. It was precisely 7:05 p.m. on Christmas Eve. The air was thick with the rich scent of smoked salmon, mulled wine, and expensive pine garlands. The effect was stunning. The catering staff, dressed in crisp black uniforms, moved with quiet, professional efficiency, attending to Veronica's 36 guests, her extended Stone clan, and David's crucial client, Mr. Sinclair, who looked appropriately impressed. I stood in the doorway of the grand ballroom, the heart of the party, wearing a simple but perfectly tailored velvet dress, a quiet crimson that spoke volumes more than Veronica's sparkling, over-the-top gown. I was polished, calm, and utterly detached. My hands were empty. I carried no food, no trays, no pretense of service. My role as the unpaid event coordinator was officially terminated. The entire setting amplified the drama. This was Veronica's grand performance, the culmination of her year of social networking and financial maneuvering. She was standing beneath the magnificent antique chandelier, accepting compliments on the flawless organization and the unbelievable ambience of the party she was taking credit for. Then she saw me. Veronica was mid-sentence, her face radiant with false modesty, when her eyes met mine across the bustling room. The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might collapse. Her smile froze, a ghastly mask of shock. The blood rushing from her cheeks exposed the raw panic that lived just beneath her veneer of perfection. I began to walk toward her, moving slowly through the crowd. Every step was a physical manifestation of my reclaimed power, every footfall shattering the illusion she had so meticulously created. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" she hissed, grabbing David's arm as I approached. Her voice was thin, frantic, a desperate whisper swallowed by the festive din. "I thought you left. I thought you were on the cruise. This is highly irregular." David, thankfully, looked confused but not hostile. He just seemed utterly lost in the luxurious chaos. I stopped directly in front of them, offering a small, cool smile. "Irregular? Veronica, this is my home. And I certainly wouldn't miss this wonderful gathering. After all, I financed it. Though I must compliment you. The caterers are excellent. You truly did simplify things perfectly." This simple dialogue, confirming my presence but denying my service, was the turning point. Veronica instantly understood that my absence had been a strategic lie, not a defeat. She switched to her immediate, desperate defense, aggression. "You're trying to sabotage me. You're trying to embarrass David in front of his clients," she spat out, her eyes blazing with genuine fear. "You planned this. You lied about the cruise." "I did plan this, Veronica," I confirmed, maintaining my calm composure. My emotional turmoil had solidified into pure, cold resolve. But I didn't plan to embarrass David. I planned to save him. Before Veronica could launch into her usual torrent of accusation, George Thompson, David's godfather, moved smoothly to my side. His presence was the anchor I needed, the neutral, respected witness. "Veronica, that's enough," George said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension with paternal authority. "Eleanor is a guest in her own home. David, let's go fetch a drink. There's someone I need you to meet in the library." George's intervention separated David from his wife, removing Veronica's primary human shield just as the plot was about to detonate. David, passive and confused, allowed himself to be led away. Veronica watched them go, realizing her control was slipping. She turned back to me, her voice trembling. "What do you want, Eleanor? More money? I'll write you a check. Just leave before Mr. Sinclair notices this absurd drama." "I want the truth, Veronica. The truth about your finances, the truth about the missing funds, and the truth about that high-premium life insurance policy on my son's life," I stated, my dialogue revealing the core motive of the confrontation. Her jaw dropped. The life insurance was her deepest secret, the horrifying plot twist I had uncovered. The color returned to her face in a rush of furious, defensive red. "You have no idea what you're talking about. That is privileged information." "You're demented," she cried, throwing caution to the wind. It was time. I glanced toward the main entrance. The door opened, and a figure entered, a sleek, uncompromising woman in a power suit that looked utterly out of place amidst the Christmas glitter. "I believe I do have an idea, Veronica," I said, stepping back slightly, gesturing toward the entrance. "And this is my attorney, Clara Vance. She specializes in financial fraud and asset freezing. She's here to discuss the court order we filed this morning against the offshore LLC you established to benefit from David's death." The moment Clara Vance entered the room, the noise of the party seemed to physically recede. The music faded, the chatter stopped, and the rich scents of the evening turned to dust. The climax had arrived. Veronica stared at the lawyer, her expression transforming from fury to absolute terror. She knew, instantly, that her entire structure had just been exposed and dismantled. The elegant, glittering setting of the party had turned into the stage for her downfall. I had reached the turning point, no longer the mother to be exploited, but the force of nature to be feared. The resolution was imminent. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that had fallen over 32 shocked faces. The contrast between the festive string quartet music, which had just abruptly ceased mid-bar, and the sight of a glamorous woman being served with legal papers on Christmas Eve was the ultimate tableau of dramatic consequence. Veronica didn't move. She stood frozen, the papers held in Clara Vance's impeccable leather glove, the scent of expensive ink now dominating the room. The resolution was beginning not with a shout, but with the quiet, devastating efficiency of the law. "This is an emergency civil injunction," Clara stated, her voice projecting calmly but authoritatively over the frozen crowd. "It requires immediate disclosure regarding the funds used to pay the premium on a specific life insurance policy and freezes all assets tied to the offshore LLC, Vespra Holdings. This motion is based on documented evidence of financial fraud, beginning with the unauthorized use of Eleanor Hayes's personal credit account." The word fraud sliced through the tension. Guests started murmuring, discreetly backing away from Veronica. The entire Stone clan, who had been laughing and sipping wine moments ago, now looked mortified, realizing they were witnesses to a catastrophic personal and financial unraveling. Veronica finally moved, her body shaking with a primal, animalistic rage. She snatched the papers from Clara and crumpled them in her fist, her carefully constructed facade shattering completely. "You witch! You calculated this! You let me bring my entire family here just to humiliate me," she screamed, abandoning all pretense of the perfect hostess. Her motives, driven by desperation, were now laid bare. "You brought your family here, Veronica, to secure leverage over David and a potential bailout from Mr. Sinclair," I corrected her, my voice low and steady. I was calm, not because I was without emotion, but because the catharsis of speaking the unvarnished truth was overwhelming. "And I prepared this evening because I realized your ambition had become predatory. You were insuring David like collateral. That is the cost of my dignity, and it is the price of your deceit." The true emotional peak of the evening arrived when David rushed back into the room, George Thompson trailing grimly behind him. David's eyes were wide, darting between the crumpled papers, his screaming wife, and me. "Mom, what is happening?" "Veronica, what is an offshore LLC?" he demanded, the confusion finally giving way to genuine fear. Veronica immediately saw her last chance to control the narrative. "David, she's lying. She's jealous and trying to ruin us. She's destroying your job, your reputation. She's psychotic." I stepped forward, putting distance between myself and Veronica's hysterical counterattack. I didn't engage with the insults. I spoke only to my son, and my dialogue reflected the complete change in our relationship, from mother to protective, legal guardian. "David, George is here as a witness. And Clara has the court documents. Your wife has been paying an exceptionally high premium on a life insurance policy taken out in your name, naming an offshore company as the sole beneficiary. That company is owned by your wife, Veronica. The funds to pay that exorbitant premium have been diverted from accounts meant for your joint expenses. She was positioning herself to profit from your death, or, at the very least, your complete financial ruin. David stared at Veronica, his face pale and sick. The full weight of the betrayal finally broke through his protective shell of passivity. He didn't look at me for confirmation. He looked at the sheer terror in his wife's eyes, and he saw the truth there. "Veronica, is that true?" he whispered. The antagonist's consequence was swift and devastating. Veronica didn't deny the policy. She just tried to minimize the impact. "It was a precautionary measure, David. You know how unstable your job is. I was just protecting us." "No," I stated, stepping in one last time with the final resolution of the conflict. "You were protecting yourself. I've had my lawyer, Clara, file the documents to freeze all accounts tied to that LLC, and we are demanding a full forensic audit of your joint finances. David, you are safe now, but you are also on your own. You have a legal team working to untangle this mess, but you have to choose to stop being a passive victim. Your wife's performance is over." The scene concluded with absolute chaos. Mr. Sinclair, the London client, discreetly informed David that due to the sudden family instability, he was retracting his business offer and leaving immediately. Veronica's family, ashamed and furious, started grabbing coats, their horrified whispers echoing through the magnificent, now ruined hall. Veronica, defeated and exposed, finally broke down in ugly, genuine sobs. She knew the game was over. David stood there, watching her, a man utterly stripped of his illusions. He finally looked at me, not with blame, but with the bewildered eyes of a man who had narrowly escaped a fire. "Mom," I offered him a gentle, yet firm nod. "Go with George, David. Let him anchor you. You have a massive amount of work ahead to reclaim your life. This house is being locked down tonight. It's no longer a resource for Veronica's scheming. I am officially leaving on my cruise tomorrow." I had won. The protagonist's arc was complete. I had fully transitioned from the emotional, giving mother to the strategic, self-preserving architect. The consequence for the antagonist was public exposure and financial ruin. The house, the setting of the 5-year-long servitude, was now completely neutral, its purpose redefined as the stage for justice. Clara and I retreated to the den, leaving George to guide a shell-shocked David through the rapidly emptying house. The final, immense catharsis was the realization that I had saved my son, not by giving him money, but by forcing him to face his weakness and his wife's malice. I had reclaimed my dignity, my home, and my future. I was finally free to take that cruise, knowing that my choice to prioritize myself had not destroyed David, but had provided him with the brutal reality check he desperately needed. The silence that followed the last slamming car door was the sound of a new, well-deserved peace. Christmas morning smelled not of pine and cinnamon, but of expensive catering boxes and the cold, definitive silence of a life reclaimed. I woke before dawn, not to the usual dread of holiday preparations, but to a profound, bone-deep stillness. My house, which had been the chaotic stage for Veronica's downfall just hours earlier, was now immaculate. The catering crew, true professionals, had packed every scrap of evidence, physical and sensory, of the disastrous party, leaving the air clean and the marble floors gleaming. The emotional resonance was overwhelming. I walked through the main hall, touching the smooth, cold railing of the staircase. This house had swallowed my identity for years, but today, it felt like my own again. The theme was clarified in the emptiness. Independence is earned through confrontation, not granted through sacrifice. I had finally chosen my own integrity over the performance of martyrdom. The resolution of the secondary conflicts began promptly at 8 a.m. with a call from Clara Vance. "Eleanor, the injunction was effective," Clara confirmed, her voice crackling with professional satisfaction. "Vespra Holdings is frozen, and we have secured all documentation regarding the life insurance policy. The fraud is evident. Veronica manipulated David into signing documents under false pretenses. The rug cleaning bill, by the way, is officially part of the civil suit as proof of financial misappropriation. The trivial detail of the rug cleaning, the incident that had started this entire war, was now a legitimate legal exhibit. The irony was palpable. Veronica's arrogance had been her undoing. The audit had begun, confirming that the elaborate Christmas party was indeed a desperate attempt to impress Mr. Sinclair and secure funds needed to cover personal debt, all while maintaining the exorbitant life insurance premium. My internal reflection focused not on Veronica's consequences, which were assured, but on David. David was staying with George and Martha, who were acting as his emotional and legal anchor, giving him space to process the catastrophic betrayal. The difficult, necessary conversation came just as I was preparing to leave for the airport.
The phone rang. It was David.
Mom, I saw the documents. George showed me the policy and the LLC filing. He started, his voice flat, broken. I feel like an idiot. I feel blind. This was the dialogue reflecting change, the moment when his character arc began to turn from passive victim to responsible adult. You're not an idiot, David, I said, walking to the front door, my suitcase waiting by the threshold. You were manipulated by someone who studied your weakness. Your weakness was trusting that your wife, who you loved, would never be predatory. He choked out a weak laugh. I thought you were being selfish. I thought you were jealous. She made me feel like you were the villain, trying to ruin my stability. I know, dear. But I had to break your stability to save your life. I couldn't stand by while she set you up for ruin. I replied gently. I didn't offer the immediate, unconditional forgiveness that he was used to. I offered him a clear path forward, a necessary boundary that defined our new relationship. David, you need to go through the pain of this audit and this divorce entirely on your own terms. I have given you the lawyer, the evidence, and the clarity. I will pay for your legal representation, but I will not rescue you emotionally, and I will not handle the logistics of your life. You have to stand up now. You have to choose to be independent of everyone, of her control, and of my enabling. The silence stretched. It was a silence of acceptance, not rejection. I understand, Mom. I thank you. Please go on your cruise. You deserve it. I'll call you when you get back. That was the closure I needed. He had finally used the language of independence. I hung up, a profound sense of closure washing over me. The emotional devastation of the conflict was still raw, but it was coupled with the fierce satisfaction of survival. I had walked away from the wreckage of a toxic relationship and saved the one person who mattered most, my son, by letting him face the consequences. The final scene was swift and liberating. I stepped out onto the porch, the waiting car service a symbol of my new, self-directed life. I glanced back at the house, a grand, beautiful structure that now felt like a badge of honor, a monument to a battle won. I wasn't going to the Caribbean to forget. I was going there to heal and to plan. I had survived a hostile takeover of my life. Now, the future beckoned, a vast, turquoise expanse, free of guilt and demands. The mother was gone, but Eleanor Hayes, the planner, the strategist, the woman who knew her worth, was finally ready to enjoy her retirement. The salt air of the Caribbean never smelled like betrayal. It smelled only of freedom, sunscreen, and the thrilling knowledge that I was precisely where I was supposed to be. That was the first thought that truly pierced the cloud of stress and relief when I stepped onto the deck of the cruise ship, leaving the cold, glittering wreckage of Christmas behind me. I stood at the railing, watching the wake churn white against the impossibly blue water, and felt a profound release. It wasn't just the escape. It was the realization that I had orchestrated the ultimate escape plan, not by running, but by forcing a confrontation. My days unfolded in a luxurious, guilt-free rhythm of reading, sunbathing, and long, quiet dinners where I spoke only when I chose to. There were no demands, no secret bills to intercept, and no hysterical daughters-in-law to anticipate. The sensory immersion of the trip, the gentle rocking of the ship, the distant cries of gulls, the taste of perfectly ripe mango, was the physical manifestation of my mental catharsis. The climax was over, but the resolution was still unfolding, piece by piece, back home. I called George Thompson every evening. He was the vital conduit to David's recovery, and through his calm, measured reports, the final pieces of the narrative began to click into place. He filed the divorce papers this afternoon, Eleanor, George reported during one call. He's still shocked, but he's functional. He's back at the office, focusing on his work, and he's seeing a therapist. He finally admitted how much control Veronica exerted, not just over the money, but over his opinions. He said she actively discouraged his friendships with anyone who valued your independence, like Carol and me. The secondary conflict of David's passivity was resolving. He wasn't just surviving, he was building a genuine, self-directed life for the first time in years. His character arc had reached a turning point fueled by necessity. The forced independence I had imposed was the only way he could break free. And Veronica? I asked, the name now feeling distant, impersonal. She's gone, Eleanor. She cleaned out the apartment and moved in with one of her cousins. Clara's team has made it impossible for her to access any funds. The fraudulent charges, the LLC freeze, and the discovery of the life insurance documents have given us undisputed leverage. Her family, the Stone clan, has completely distanced themselves. Turns out, she had borrowed significant amounts from them over the years, using her networking, parties as leverage, and they finally realized they were simply bankrolling her image. Veronica's ultimate consequence was not just losing a husband, but losing her social and financial platform. The antagonist, whose power relied entirely on manipulation and illusion, was left with nothing but the ugly, exposed truth. My reflection deepened as the cruise progressed. I sat by the rail one afternoon, watching the sun dip into the ocean, a breathtaking, solitary spectacle. I realized the profound lesson of this entire ordeal, the true clarification of the theme. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they plan to sell the ashes for profit. I had spent my life believing that my value was tied to my sacrifice, my availability, and my quiet competence. Veronica, in her greed, had accidentally shown me that my greatest strength was my ability to say, I am not available. The life I would return to would be fundamentally different. The house, which I had almost handed over to her chaos, would become a center for my own pursuits. I had already begun planning the conversion of that climate-controlled basement into my pottery studio. I made a final call to Carol, sharing the news of David's filing and Veronica's retreat. So, no more shortbread demands? Carol asked, her voice alight with amusement. No more shortbread, Carol. And no more being the unpaid coordinator, I affirmed. I've learned that a boundary is not just a polite request, it's a legal perimeter. And sometimes, you need a shark in a power suit to enforce it. The character arcs were fully realized. I was no longer Eleanor, the shrinking hostess. I was Eleanor Hayes, the retired English teacher who had successfully executed a complex legal and social strategy to save her son and herself. As the ship turned toward home, I began to think about the future. I knew David and I would have a long, slow road to genuine reconciliation, one built on mutual respect, not obligation. I would continue to maintain my financial independence and my boundaries with the same sharp determination I had used to defeat Veronica.